Welcome for joining us today. Topic is efficient CAD management for teams. My name is Jeff Haney. I'm a senior technical specialist. We have Kyle Groves here. He's a senior technical specialist as well, and we're excited to be talking to you about this today. So our agenda for today: why does CAD management matter? CAD management essential components. That could be profiles, templates, standards, content and documentations, managing and promoting CAD standards. And then why is CAD management important? Communication is hard enough already. Powerful templates really do make life easier for everybody. Major processes deserves a critical eye on workflow. And we use templates in every software to start with the same customization for every effort. And turn it over to Kyle.
Yeah, well, I do want to talk for just a little bit more like why is CAD management important? So, we all hear this, we beat this drum, and people are like, yeah, well, you're supposed to have standards, and you should really be working nights and weekends to get it done because we're not going to pay you to do it anyway. But CAD management's important for that communication aspect. We're all here working on a team, and we want to be able to walk into any drawing for a project that we're working on and know what we can expect. And when we know what we can expect and we have this shared foundation of communication and shared foundation of managed expectations, life gets a lot easier and we're allowed to avoid things. One of my favorite sayings as a CAD management consultant is prevent the preventable. Well, that is at its heart exactly what CAD management is doing. We're taking away opportunities for people to make mistakes. And whether or not they do things right from that point is kind of up to them and a little bit more fluid. But the more we can do to control, basically baby-proof our CAD management house, stick the outlet plugs in and don't let anybody go running around with a fork to stick into the outlet. If we can get that done, then we're doing a lot to help out our project teams. And so that's kind of the platform that I want to set the stage with here today is we want to do CAD management tasks because we want to make it easy for people to do stuff, and we want to make it easy for people to avoid those really common mistakes. So what do we need for our CAD management platform? What are some of those essential components that we're going to be working with? Well, first and foremost, we need to have a corporate profile. I'm sure that a large number of people attending or watching this webinar today are using this as part of their deployment, and that's great. For anybody who's not, you really have to get this set up. Your corporate profile is going to standardize access to how people are going to be using and starting files related to our templates. So just like we have common Word templates, we might have email templates for communicating with clients. We definitely need to be starting from a common set of information: AutoCAD layers, AutoCAD annotation styles, Civil 3D object and label styles. We want to start off with that every single time we start a new project with the information that's appropriate. Simply taking a save as of a project that we already did where we were mostly confident that a lot of the stuff was what we liked and there are a few things that we can change when we get that far again on this next project, that's just not going to cut it. First of all, it's a great way to introduce instability into your files. Turns out that when you delete something from a file, you don't delete it from the drawing history. So by the time a project has been saved as 4 or 5 times, it's still going to remember every alignment, surface, corridor, or other stuff that was created inside that file, and it's going to drag that forward to your next project. So simply put, you got to have a profile, and one of the key things for having a profile is making sure that you're starting from a proper template that's going to be used to save that as, or effectively run that save as for your standards for the next time. Another thing that corporate profiles make really easy is your plotting environment. So with that plotting environment, we want to have the same title blocks in use, sheet after sheet, page after page, and we want to be able to use our sheet set manager. Other stuff that we're going to be able to standardize here is access to our plotting files, those CTB tables or those STB tables, whichever one you're using. I'd rather have you using one style consistently than constantly going back and forth because of whatever you feel like. So having that plotting information standardized is going to make it really easy to have a clean, consistent deliverable by the time we finally get these projects out the door. The last reason why it's really important to have a corporate profile is for your content. So everything that is a layer or an annotation style or a Civil 3D style, that all lives inside your template. However, there's other content that we're using as part of our corporate standards that don't live inside your templates. Primarily, we'd be thinking about things like our pipe network catalog. We'd be thinking about Civil 3D custom subassemblies, and also possibly our survey standards for what we're using for our figure prefix databases, our standard survey databases for default. That's all stuff that we still need to find a file path to and a link to inside of the software. If we're not using a corporate profile, it's possible for the same group of people to be accessing different content because that's not standardized through their profile. So with that, we are going to be kind of in and out. Our PowerPoint itself is pretty brief today, but at this point, Jeff and I are going to go hop inside the software and show off some of the things about what it means to have this corporate profile set up. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and launch Civil 3D, not by going down to my start menu, not by going and choosing anything in particular, but I'm going to actually look inside. We've got two profiles that we're going to show off for you today. One is a little bit more internal for ATG, and another one is actually a living, breathing profile that I've got set up for one of my clients, TKDA, based out of St. Paul, Minnesota. So first up, though, let's go look at our basic one. So ATG resells add-on tools for Civil 3D from a company called CTC. To make those demos as clean and efficient and eye-popping as possible, we've actually got our own custom profile that we use to launch those data sets. Now, you can download all of the files from the CTC website by yourself, but what this is showing is that we've got a core concept of file division inside that profile. And every time we launch that profile, the name of this folder might be a little different from place to place, but we're always going to be doing this from a consistent shortcut that is going to specifically ask us to start Civil 3D in a specific profile. So when I launch that shortcut, this is the easiest way to make sure that your corporate profile is being used and being standardized. Talk to your IT team and have them get this custom shortcut created and have them get this distributed to everybody's desktop. We'll show you how to make this, or we'll show you some considerations for helping this stay up to date. But that's your first task, is to get a custom shortcut created. And everybody's first instruction is to always open Civil 3D using that shortcut. We can confirm that we've launched the right profile by going into our options dialog. Pretty easy to get into options, right click with nothing, go find it at the bottom of your menu, or simply start typing in the word options to your command line and it'll get it popped up. From there, we're gonna go head over to our profiles tab. If I would have launched Civil 3D just using my start menu, Civil 3D 2021, Imperial, I would have launched with my profile C3D Imperial. But it actually started up with this C3D 2021 CTC Imperial. And what a profile does is kind of two overarching things. First off, it describes where all of the files are going to be found that you're looking for. Sometimes we'll have an opportunity to ask for a specific file, but it's easier to think of your profile as a spider web full of paths that teleport you to a certain destination. Once you get to that destination, you'll have a choice for the files that you're going to execute once you get there, but your profile is going to help that stuff all be readily available to you in the first place. So our first major stop here in our options dialog is this support file search path. This says when I have to call on some sort of other file, maybe it's a line type file, maybe it's a hatch pattern or a shape file, where am I going to go start looking for all this stuff? And these are going to be locations that you're predefining in your CAD standards. Now, I have this profile set up as a local deployment. I'm a huge fan of this. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But effectively, right here, I have a folder called setup. I have different files that I'm using for my imperial versus my metric template or my metric standards, but this is where I can put things like my ACAD doc list to manage system variables. This is where I can put my line type patterns, my hatch patterns, my shape SHX files. Really, a lot of that can be pretty flat. We don't need a whole separate location for our SHX files versus our PHT and our LIN files. Those can all go in the same spot. But by having this file path loaded up into my support file search path, anytime my file asks it to go find a particular file, it's going to start using this list from top to bottom. So anything that you have for custom files that you want found, make sure those are at the top of this list. From there, there's a whole bunch of out-of-the-box locations. I would strongly recommend not deleting those, just in case something isn't getting found. But you're going to want to go through and make sure that anywhere those hatch patterns exist or those other basic supporting files, get those consolidated and call them out here in your support file search path by running the add or the browse commands. Feel free to move things up and down for that relative order. Something else you're going to be interested in doing is looking at your customization files. Your main CUI, I'm a really big fan of leaving this as the out-of-the-box CUI file. That means that every time you move forward as a year version, you're not going to accidentally drag forward old commands that aren't in use anymore, or you might be missing out on some of those new commands by replacing your main CUI file. An enterprise CUI is a really great option for giving everybody access to the same standard content. So if you have a corporate ribbon tab or a corporate toolbar that you want everyone to have, it's a great opportunity to take advantage of the enterprise CUI file. Other things you can do in here, though, is you can put together your printer support settings. So where am I going to go find my printing files? Well, somewhere on my drive, I need to have that set up where all of this information is consolidated. And then AutoCAD is going to find that information when it gets put out there. So also strongly recommend having a subfolder within your profile specifically related to your sheets and to your plotting. In here, you can put things like your standard sheet set. You can have your XREF DWGs if you're using that for your backgrounds. We've got STBs, we've got CTBs, we have our basic plotters, the PC3 files. By putting all this stuff in a common location, and by putting it by hard assigning that location through our profile, it's going to make it really easy for us to find that stuff. So because I have my plot style tables called out in here, because I have my printer configurations called out in here, all I have to do is hit plot. And as soon as I come here to my page setup, I drop this down, I'll see that I have my CTC style plotting table, which is the one I've got right here inside my corporate deployment, inside my Sheets subfolder. The other great thing is I can also go find my custom plotters, my plotting configurations. So I have my line type manager PC3 file in there. That's this very same PC3 file right over here. So not everywhere inside our options dialog we're going to want to go through and set up those different files, but we are definitely going to want to take our walk through here to say, where might I want to consolidate information? Another really key area to look at is going to be your template settings. So by going through here and by paying attention to all 4 of these different dropdowns, we have opportunities to say not only what physical files am I going to start working with, for example, our sheet creation and page setup overrides, we can just go ahead and choose one layout or one DWT for those layouts, but we can also say, where do my template files live? How do I make it easy for users to start with that right information? Well, because I have this set to my templates subfolder, I created a cubby for it within my profile, and then I assigned that cubby to my Civil 3D options dialog. Now I can start with the plain ACAD, I can start with my design template, or I can start with my survey template. So now that when I come over here and when I say new file, anytime I go and I have my file type selected as a DWT, it's always going to bring me back to this location. Go find some random stuff on my project settings. Oops, that's not where I wanted to be. I wanted to go find my templates. I switch out, I switch back to my DWT, and I've automatically been navigated right back to my profile where I have those templates stored. Would strongly recommend having a shortcut wherever your base design templates are. Have a shortcut to your sheet template. That way you can make it really easy to search for DWT files. And if you store your sheet stuff in a separate directory, it makes it really easy to get over there.
Speaking of shortcuts, Kyle, what about when we go to File and Open, kind of where you were at? Should we put a shortcut up to get to our projects quicker over on the left side there?
Oh yeah, definitely. And so this is something that's profile dependent, but on the left half of our AutoCAD File Explorer window, left bar of here is a set of file locations. You can remove or you can add various iterations of these. I don't know why BIM 360 is on here 100 times. But now what I can do is I can say, look, next time I want to go through and do my CAD management, I want to go right to my main folder for all of this. You can browse to a particular location, and once you like where you're at, you can either add your current folder, or by doing the standard add command, you can just type in what you want it to be named and where you want that file path to be. But now, when I close out of here and save those places, the next time I run anything using the AutoCAD File Explorer, I'm going to see that location in here. So this isn't just for CAD managers. This is really handy for any user who's constantly working on a narrow set of projects. They can just go navigate to the project location on the server, add that in as their shortcut, and now they can get to those files anytime they want. Speaking of shortcuts, last thing that we're going to discuss with this is how we can actually get our Civil 3D shortcut created so that we're always launching this with the same profile at the same time. Well, once you go through, would strongly recommend starting with the Civil 3D Imperial profile. Anytime you set that to current and then say add to list is always a save as for a new version. But once you get through and you get your profile taken care of correctly, you're going to want to export that profile. When we export our profile, what we get is an ARG. That ARG says, I am a set of definitions that is used to rebuild a profile. Let me get back here to my setup subfolder, my Imperial subfolder. So I have an ARG. Let me go ahead and open that in my Notepad editor. As CAD management staff, I strongly recommend you get some kind of Notepad editor beyond just basic Windows Notepad. I like Notepad++. That is just one of many that exist in there. But what this is roughly 3,000 plus or minus a couple hundred lines of code. And this is all written in the format of Windows registry edits. And that's ultimately what a profile is mostly, it's just Windows registry edits. So why we want this ARG file is because our custom shortcut is going to be pointing, and this is where we're going to have our target line set up to launch that custom profile. Now, you can't make this window any bigger, so once you go to the properties of your icon, I always just recommend copy that out, and we can paste it into our Notepad editor so we can get a little bit easier time reading this. But basically, what we care about in this random string of files, we see here, this is my year version actually launching the application. This LD switch is some kind of random stuff, but this /P, this is the most important one because that means start Civil 3D using a specific profile. Now I could just go ahead and tell it to use C3D21 CTC Imperial, but that's just going to give me a profile definition if it already exists. What about the very first time that I have a user trying to launch their profile? If the profile doesn't exist, how are we supposed to get all of those definitions? Well, the answer is the ARG file. Because my ARG file has all those Windows registry edits and it creates my profile for me, then I'm going to have that profile created and created perfectly, regardless of whether or not I've run it before. Now, the very last thing that I have to say about this is everything in Civil 3D has a, like the name of your object is the most important thing that you can cover. And so if I go through and I open my profile and my ARG says, all right, well, create me a profile and call it Civil 3D 21 CTC Imperial. Well, our profile has other stuff that it talks about too. It's got our display settings, crosshair. Are you team 100 or are you team 5? I'm team 100. So I'm gonna go up here and I'm gonna change that. Pretty much everything in your options dialog, and yes, including your display tab, is all defined by your profile. So once Civil 3D is launched, once it creates this profile and once it creates that profile name, the next time you launch using your shortcut, since it's calling out that ARG file that says create a profile by this name, if the name in your ARG and the name in Civil 3D match, nothing's going to happen. It's not going to run these other 3,000 plus lines of code. It's going to say, oh, my name's match, everything's the way that it's supposed to be, no big deal. So this allows us to get all of those basic settings put together. Where are my plotting locations? Where's my support file search path? What pipe network catalog am I looking at? What survey settings am I using when I launch out of this custom icon? That's all put together. And then I can go through and I can make my customizations. So now that we have that, we've got our target line for our Windows shortcut in the /p switch inside our quotes. This is just an absolute file path for how to find our definition ARG file. We make that edit, we go back into our custom shortcut properties, and we go and we just paste that whole line of text right back into our target location. We go ahead and shut Civil 3D down. And I can now launch using this custom shortcut. Again, you're going to want to talk to your IT about how to distribute this custom shortcut to everybody. Doesn't matter if you have a local profile, doesn't matter if it's based on your network. Get this on everyone's desktop. Make sure they're starting from the same profile every time you're working on your company's standards. With that, I'll turn over to Jeff to talk a little bit more about some of our plotting standards and why it can be important to use title blocks and Sheet Set Manager to kind of help standardize the way that our plotting environment works.
Yeah. Am I still going to use your screen there?
Yes, unless you have some standards that you'd like to show off on your end.
No. Going back in here. So plot style.
That's 19. That's not right.
This one?
Here, I'll get you there.
Okay, cool. Hard to see on that. So yeah, plot styles and is important because this kind of will help you determine, how it plots out. So whether you're using a CTB or STB, you want to make sure you have what's in play. And one of the things that you want to do is when you want to be thinking about this when you start your standards and stuff, because you want to make sure you're not going down a rabbit hole and get messed up. So you want to make sure if line type thicknesses, line weights, all that stuff looks the way that you guys want. Also, whether you always use this DWG to PDF or you have one that goes to a plotter, you want to see how that's going to set up using your Sheet Set Manager. I always recommend going to a DWG to a PDF. That way, when you print something out, it's already in PDF format, so you can send it to somebody else if you need to via email or through a data system. So, or to a client. So with that, let's move over here. And just to start off with something, if you go into sheet set, you can just type it in. It will pull it up over on the side. And expand that out a little bit. So you have your sheets list that will show you populate all the information in there. You can also open up a existing one by hitting just open. And you can start a new one by doing a new sheet set. How do you already have a pre-existing one to open up?
Yeah, there's a CTC sheet set.
Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and hit open. And see, go ahead back over here and use the. Is it frozen on your side? There we
go. It might be. My internet connection is unstable. Cool.
All right.
I got that open for you.
Oh, cool. I'll go back. So right here, we give it a good name, and one of our topics was always be thoughtful and deliberate on your naming conventions, and this goes for anything. How you name your sheet sets, to how you name your styles, to how you name your layers, line types, and even your naming of your files. So CTC sheet set gets the point across. So we'll go ahead in here. And Kyle, I think I might have to turn it back over to you because it's not populating.
Well, I can click and you can talk.
Okay, cool. Can you go into the properties part for me? Perfect. And so right here with these fields, we can set up information about the project. By default, it's going to have like your name, project number, project name, phase, milestone. And then of course, where the sheets are stored and located at. And with those already pre-populated for you, you can also add custom fields in here. And a custom field in this case could be, okay, I would like to include a designer, checker, approval information like that. So just hit add, you put it in your name that you would want for your value. For your name, the value could be somebody's initials, whatever the case may be. So what I was pointing at is sheet set or sheet. If you want it part of the whole sheet set, you click on the sheet set part. If you want it specific to a sheet, you're going to click on the sheet part. That would be the numbers and things and the title of a certain sheet. And you can add as many of these as you want. I've seen them this to be pretty in depth. Kyle, do you know how many is there like a limit to this?
I don't know of a mathematical or a software limit, but
yeah.
Common fields that you'd want to have in play here are your design, check, and reviewed by, revision name, revision number, revision date, revision description, perhaps a revised by field for all of those. About 4 revisions in your sheet set manager should do for most people, although many of the firms I work with have that go between 8 and 10, just for those big, long projects that may or may not have a lot of comments associated with them. Other things like a licensing professional name or a licensed professional number can be really helpful for putting that info in. Really, this is all the stuff that we want to automate the creation of. So we don't have to go into each individual layout to update that information as we move forward. So what we now have is we've got a sheet set, we've added some custom properties to it, and we have an opportunity to get We've also said when I'm creating a sheet, what template file am I going to be using, and maybe even what layout am I going to be using off of that. So by using our sheet set manager, we're already having an opportunity to standardize the information available to our users. So right now I can just go ahead and I can right click and I can say new sheet. And it's going to ask me for my, well, that's silly, it should have retained that value. Either way, when I go to my templates, that's why I have my shortcut to my sheet location. I can now open my sheet template and I can say, give me a general 50 scale layout to add into part of my sheet set. I can go ahead and number this, call this 01, demo plan.
And notice it automatically added that into our sheet set manager location.
Yep. And my, now technically I would definitely want to be using this in a project file setting, not just my standards setting, but because my sheet set lived in its particular folder, and we told our drawings to be created in that particular folder, it's already going ahead and doing that for us. So again, our sheet set manager helps us keep track of all of that different information. Now, how do we go ahead and get this stuff put together? Well, and have that design by, reviewed by, checked by info plopped right down into our drawing. What we're gonna do, doesn't really matter if you use a text, an M-text, or a block attribute, but we're going to be using AutoCAD fields to put this together. In our field category, we definitely want to be looking at sheet set, and for anything that we have those custom, that's what our, we have a sheet custom and we have a sheet set custom deliverable. And once I've already got that put together inside my sheet set properties, and this file is associated with the sheet set, it's going to go ahead and drop these down. I don't even have to copy and paste. So now what I can do is I can just make a new instance of that text field. And I can go in and I can edit that field so that I can have one of these fields being my current sheet custom, my checked by, or sorry, my reviewed by. Can have another one for my design by. And my, what do I have? Design review, I need my check. Now, when you're getting these set up in the first place, I strongly suggest that your default value for all of those is something that makes sense or that's easy to check by. But now I can come through here and I can say, look, I designed this. Jeff checked it, and Jeff reviewed it. Whatever values I put in here are now going to be pushed out to my sheet automatically. All I have to do is edit my sheet or my sheet set properties and do a drawing regen. Sorry, I did those in my overall sheet properties, my sheet set properties that won't push through to individual sheets. So this is funny hat, serious hat, hatastic. Doesn't matter what they are. As soon as we get those associated with a particular sheet, that information is now going to get pushed out and updated for us. And that's what's so awesome about Sheet Set Manager is I can go through, I can do this. I don't have to have my drawings open. Means I don't have to go into every single drawing and every single layout and modify every single attribute once I have it changed my project. I just open up the sheet set and I go through and I manage my properties of a sheet or my entire sheet set. and that information just pushes out across my entire project. That's just one of the many things that you can use to do CAD management or to help you out with your CAD management burden. A lot of firms are using sheet sets, and they're not necessarily super fantastic for every job. But if you have more than a handful of layouts, once you start getting into a site or a residential job that's a little over an acre, you're probably going to want to be using your sheet set to keep track of that information. You also get a chance to do one-click plotting with your sheet set. So if you right-click on your total sheet set and you go to your publish, you can manage your page setups. You can define where your PDF is going to get saved to in your project location, keep it all multiple pages for just one file. And then lastly, you can go through and you can just plot to, you publish it to your PDF set. And in a couple of clicks, everything in your entire sheet set is going to get pushed out.
And the good thing is you can do one sheet, you can do a couple, you can do a subset, or you can do the whole thing.
Yep. So, that's kind of our spiel on why our corporate profile matters and some of the basics for getting that set up. Another thing that I'm a really big fan of is getting a corporate tool palette implemented. Now, your corporate tool palette is going to be something, again, we want to standardize people's access to information. And the biggest overall theme that I can recommend for implementing tool palettes is that any question that your users might have inside the software should be able to have that answer found within the software. The tool palette is really cool because it's not just about inserting blocks or subassemblies. You can have your tool palette launch macros to open files on your network. So you can launch a chapter of your CAD manual doing it this way. You can launch a link to your firm's intranet or to your favorite YouTube playlist the next time you want somebody to understand how they're supposed to go through a certain workflow. So anything that you might want to provide an answer for to those low-level questions inside CAD, you're going to really want to consider putting that inside your tool palette. So with this, again, we can launch helpful links and documents. We can use this as convenient access to standard block libraries so that we can be using the same symbols for our plan sets as well as our same details to be put in use. Also, if you're a firm that's using corridors, you have to be using the tool palette already to access subassemblies. So with this, again, this is a little tough with Jeff not being able to fully control my screen. So I'll just go ahead and plot along. No pun intended. And I'll show through that process of kind of creating a new tool palette tab and how to get some blocks thrown in there for your firm. So
yeah, one question is about, you could actually put links, not just blocks, in the tool palette.
Yes, you can launch hyperlinks to websites or other things. You can also put in, you can have it launch files for you. I'll walk through that. But first I want to show the really easy part, which is the addition of tool palette information that is block-based. So a tool palette is technically one of these actual tabs that live inside your palette named tool palette. Terminology gets a little squirrely in here, but really any one of these individual tabs, that is your tool palette. And traditionally, how one changes the context of all of the individual tabs they're looking at is through a tool palette group. So there's, out of the box, there's a tool palette group just for your subassemblies. There's a tool palette group for like lighting and metric and whatever. Most of the time though, I recommend having your tool palette set up though, not using the traditional tool palette group, but instead having a macro that goes through and it changes a very specific variable inside your profile. And that variable is your tool palette file location. When you navigate away from the out-of-the-box location, as soon as you save your profile, it's going to write in a new, what I like to call a master tool palette file. And by switching your tool palette group this way, it allows you to, or it just happens to be faster in many questions. or in many situations, than using the traditional tool palette group, especially if you're a network based on your profile and on your tool palette content. So we have a custom CUI file. I generally prefer the ribbon over the toolbar opportunity, but if I go look at that custom CUI file, all it's doing is it is taking the macro for where our tool palette location is. That's this TP tool palette path variable, and we're just hard coding in a new file location for it to look at. And that's how I like to switch my tool palette groups. So yes, you can have a tool palette group for subassemblies. You can have a different tool palette group for really anything that you want. I usually, when I'm helping firms out with this, I create a PowerPoint, which is basically just a really nice big canvas for a hierarchy smart art. And then I can come in here and say, all right, look, we've got a general tool palette group. This is where we put our help, our CAD manual. So we put some common commands and Lisp routines. We got another group full of tabs for our details, another one for annotation, and another one for that one specific practice group that has all their own custom content. We've got our corridor stuff. But basically, each one of these blue cells is a tool palette group. Each one of these columns, then, those are all individual palette tabs. And you can create a new palette tab super easy. Just right click on the tab side of here and say new palette. And I'm going to call this one symbols, or I'm going to call this one site symbols. The biggest thing that I can recommend for these is when you're loading in blocks on your tool palette. I got that wrong. It's site features, not site symbols. Is have more than one block in all of these drawings, and then all of the blocks that live in that drawing are all of the blocks that are going to live in your tool palette. So when I open my site features DWG, I'm going to find some 30 different blocks. I can bring these onto my tool palette a number of different ways. I can simply select one at a time and drag and drop them over. That works pretty great. Otherwise, my AutoCAD Design Center is going to give me a great opportunity to just go find my blocks, select all of these, and I can drag these all over at once. When I do that, it's going to put it in as alphabetical order. It might take a little bit of processing time depending on how many blocks at a time you're trying to do. While I let that spin, looks like we've had a couple of questions come in. Jeff, I think we answered Edward's question on different tool palettes with corporate tools. I'm going to go ahead and take a swing at what Brian has to say about some of these different questions.
Brian asked, one question is, are there still issues with Sheet Set Manager and BIM 360 collaboration? I have not experienced issues with it, but interested to know if other people have. So that's my answer is I haven't had issues with it. But have you noticed issues, Kyle?
No, I haven't been noticing that. However, I also haven't been too deep in the BIM 360 C4C world yet. So Brian, would actually recommend send an email to Jeff and I after the webinar here, and we'll see if we can't get a better understanding of what the problem used to be and whether or not it's gotten any better.
Okay. And another question from Brian as well. Do you recommend centralizing data shortcuts for all projects or a per project location?
I personally prefer every project has its own working folder and its own data shortcut subfolder. That's just a preference thing for me. I haven't noticed any major differences between keeping them centralized or not. Jeff, what about you?
I'm a big fan of it being in per project. It just makes for me, at least when I was in the industry and stuff, it made it easier to find everything together in per project in its own folder structure.
So, yeah, I'm also a really big fan of being deliberate inside the software, and Got another great question coming in from Brian, and I was getting a little ahead of myself. I like being deliberate inside the software, and changing my working folder is a more global task that's going to tell me whether or not I'm on the right track than it is to simply go in and change my, to set my data shortcuts project folder. By introducing that extra step, yeah, it's an extra 2-3 clicks, but it's going to be immediately obvious to me whether or not I'm in the right location or whether or not I'm looking at the correct project. But ultimately, if your standards, Brian, are, if they're set up, I would rather have a poor standard consistently and thoroughly and well executed than a good standard that nobody really follows. Because if no one's following it, then it's not that much use anyway. So, well, getting back here into the software, getting back here to the tool palette stuff, my drag and drop in my tool palette did function correctly. So now I have a macro written up for each one of those blocks that when I click that button, it says, okay, I'm gonna go find a block name. I'm gonna go find it in a particular file, and maybe I wanna scale it or explode it when I insert it. Maybe I wanna have extra layer assignment or plot style assignment. Any of these things are all tracked in by our tool palettes. But now the cool part is I can open up any file anywhere. Let's create a brand new random design file. And now, as soon as I left click on this deciduous tree, once to launch my macro in my command line, the second click is going to be the one that drops it in my drawing. This is that exact same block. It's coming from the same. It's coming from the same location, and it's going to be that same content every single time. You can use this for blocks for your plan symbology. You can use this for your standard details. You can use this for pretty much anything that's block based. Other really cool things that you can do with your custom tool palettes are have Civil 3D launch files for you, or AutoCAD. Tool palettes work in plain AutoCAD too. And for that, you're going to need to have a custom macro. And this macro is for launching files is going to be shell space, and then your file name inside quotes. And because I have my file path baked in here too, then it's always going to find it right here within my tool palette. So as soon as I click on this user guide button, it's going to go ahead and launch that PDF for me right away. So this is how I can get that documentation to be available for everybody. Oh, hey, you're not sure what plotting or what name you're supposed to use on this file? Just go to your tool palette and click on the button that opens that piece of my CAD manual. You want to go watch some videos on how we think people should be going about learning about things? Well, that's easy. We can create a macro for that using the _.browser macro. And then putting in our internet browser location right to it. I click the button, it launches the web page for me. We can do all kinds of stuff with this. You can have an email triggered to go to a certain recipient with a certain subject line so that it makes it really easy for people to submit feedback. Your options are pretty endless here. There's a lot of cool stuff that you can do with this. My favorite one though is a macro that we call clean drawing. All it is it's a serial macro with an audit, and then it minus purges regapps, zero length objects, empty text objects, orphan data, and does a second audit. Put this everywhere, make it really easy for people to keep their stuff organized. With that, did want to circle back to the sheet set stuff. Jason Douglas is reporting that Autodesk had fixed the BIM 360 sheet set issue. And then Tom wanted to chime in that our sheet sets get redone to default. And then some things are disappearing, so a little bit of conflicting information. It may or may not be fixed. If you're having issues with that, definitely feel free to reach out to ATG's support team, and they can help get you on the right track with all of that. Another question that had come up from Brian, tool palette groups are usually are stored in the user profile. If we create a new tool palette, how do we update the user's tool palette groups without resetting their profile? So that is why I'm a really big fan of the of this macro method, because as soon as you navigate to that location, it's going to show you whatever's there. However, if you're using traditional tool palette groups, it's not gonna do anything, because you're sorry, it's going to do something, but if you're using a traditional tool palette group, you're not overriding this file path, so you're not overriding the file path. The profile is not changing. Tool palettes work in the same way that your profile does. It says, where am I going to go? What am I going to find there? So your master tool palette file says, what tabs do I have available? And then the individual palette files say what tabs exist, and then inside those files is just a bunch of metadata that says, what's the name of my block? What's the drawing that it lives in? Am I going to explode it or rotate it or put it on a certain layer? So Brian, we may have to continue that conversation offline, but I guess there's a number of reasons why I have gone away from the traditional tool palette group. I really like the concept of just changing this file path location altogether. It works quickly, it works smoothly, and as long as you know where that tool palette content lives at, yes, you can write a macro that will switch those groups for you really easily. But yesterday I was working with a client trying to get some stuff consolidated. All I had to do was have a Windows File Explorer open with my location for my tool palettes, and I could paste that in and I could switch around however I wanted to. Obviously not much of a user move, but for CAD management, not that big of a deal. All right, keep going. We got about a few more minutes left. I did want to touch on some other things for for managing and promoting our CAD standards. So you've gotten together, you've decided that you have a plan and you want to get it out there. We need to be thoughtful and we need to be deliberate. Like I said before, a bad standard, well executed, is usually going to get you farther than a good standard that's poorly executed. And what we're really doing here is we're trying to solve communication and get that put together. Also, it's a really great idea if you have the user base, if you have the size, try and get a group together, try and at least have a buddy. The group is going to be stronger than the individual. This is going to, A, give you different perspectives and give you the different software needs from maybe the Muni group and the transportation group and the land development group. You know, they might have very different needs. And if one group just isn't having their needs met, they're not going to want to follow the standards because they don't offer them any benefit. Having those different perspectives is great. It also helps bring credibility to your standards. When you say, look, folks, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it, you can say, because Jim in land development told us about all your guys' problems. So this is our honest effort to solve those. Jennifer said that they didn't have good pipe label styles, so we made them for you. And Jennifer does this kind of work all the time. So when you have multiple people participating in these decisions, it brings that level of credibility and it brings that level of democracy. Also, documenting things is going to be really key to getting this done and getting it done well. In order for documentation to be effective, it A, must exist in the first place, and B, it has to be easy to find. Another axiom of CAD management, if you want people to do something, you got to make it easy. If they can't find the manual, they're not going to read it. Doesn't mean you have to print it, but that tool palette is a really great way to give them access to it. The other reason why it's important for this documentation to exist is if you can't give somebody references and feedback on what's the right way to do something, how can you justifiably yell at them for doing it wrong? You know, if you're being a parent or if you're training your dog or your cat, you got to have that positive reinforcement. You got to tell them what you want them to do instead of just yelling at them, waiting for them to guess what the right way to get something done is. If you have that document, you can say, hey, look, you know what? I see why you did it this way. That's not the way that we're supposed to do it. Next time, just try and read through this document. And if you have any questions, I'd love to come over and help you. Final parting shot on managing and promoting your CAD standards. Just because you started doesn't mean you get to walk away. Your CAD standards are alive. They're living documents. They need that regular care and upkeep to keep pace with what your firm is doing and why you're doing it that way. In conclusion, what did we learn, or what were we hoping to show you all today? Well, first of all, your CAD management boils down to effective communication. Our CAD standards ensure that we're all speaking the same language the same way. Whatever we're going to use, we got to make it easy to find, and we got to make it consistent in execution. By using that corporate profile, we're hoping to get everybody using the same content to get started. By using a corporate tool palette, we're trying to help give them the right information to keep them moving. Either way, we're controlling their access to information, and we're giving them information that is going to keep them moving in the direction that we want them to move. When we're using a standard AutoCAD or Civil 3D profile, we're using it to make it easy for users to follow those standards, I already covered that. When we're implementing that standard tool palette, we want to make sure all of their CAD questions can be answered within our CAD software. And CAD standards are unfortunately never done. If they are not maintained and updated, then they're not going to be useful. Your users aren't going to want to follow your standards because they don't know why they're doing it, or they don't have good feedback for why they've got it done. And if it also looks like it's 10 years old, they might not even trust it for credibility's sake. So even just going through and periodically updating those screenshots can be a helpful part of the process. So
And
with that,
we have a question if you would like to try to answer this one real quick.
Yes.
Is there a location to find macros needed to add web pages or files or launch emails from the tool palette? That question's from David.
You know what, David, give me just a second. I don't know where we can find them on the internet. I have my own little copy that I keep back on the ATG side of things. And hopefully we can get this flashed up so that on the YouTube recording, people can just hit pause and get a good feel for it. Give me just a moment to dig that up.
We've had some great communications with the team today out there, so thank you guys for participating with us.
All right, so I'm just going to slowly scroll through this. Let the YouTube and the pause button be your guide for this one. Semicolon is your operator. ~C is an escape command, so you always want to start off with a couple of those so you don't accidentally go through and do some things. Shell browses and open files. No backslashes in tool palettes or in CUIs. They don't work that way. Underscore browser or underscore dot browser launches a web path. Loading a list routine is in there. Inserting a drawing is going to insert that and explode that macro. You can do this with hatches 2. And then also here is that macro for getting a email address auto loaded in. Your %20 is going to be that space bar in your subject line. Did allow you to speak if you wanted to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Hey, thanks, Brian.
Hey, Brian.
So you were wondering about tool palette groups being stored on user profiles. So over at your firm, Brian, are y'all using traditional tool palette groups, or are you using macros to switch?
No, we're using the tool palette groups. I hadn't thought about using macros before.
Okay. You know, honestly, I didn't really use tool palettes before I came to ATG. And when I got started here, Brian Lewandowski had already told me about the macro switch. So I really haven't spent that much time using the traditional tool palette groups because I just have a lot of fun with the macro method.
Okay.
Ultimately, your big thing when you're dealing with the macro method is once you navigate to that file location and once you apply your profile update, that's when your Windows file structure gets its update. And for this, I'm actually going to go into TKDA because they told me that I could, and theirs is a little more realistic.
So the way I macro, that basically changes that tool palette search path, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So as soon as you run that macro and it says, here, give me this new location, corporate CAD folder, year, all, tool palette, tool palette group, you're going to see 3 files. You're going to see a ACT TP catalog.atc. This is the master. The master tool palette file says, what tabs do I have available to me?
Okay.
Those should match the contents of your palettes folder. These ATC files, same extension, these ATC files are actually all of those lists of buttons that you see inside your tool palette. So
so that's the individual tool palettes, right?
Yep. And what's the drawing name? What's the block name? What's all that other stuff? So once that Windows file location exists, once that stuff gets written, Brian, I believe y'all are using local profiles?
Yes.
Okay, yep. So once that exists the first time, you can always navigate back to that location and it will read those ATC files as they exist. My big recommendation when you're doing these custom tool palettes is the having a file that I call the source folder. So your source folder says whether I'm launching a list routine or a drawing or whatever type of file I want to access, it's all getting flatly stored inside my source folder. And that just makes it easier for me to keep, hey, I don't touch ATC files. I might edit a Word file or a drawing for the block content, but I'm not going to touch any of this other stuff because then I might break things. And then this is all going to be part of your general upload, download, synchronization process for the local.
Right. So each one of these folders here is in essence a tool palette group.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
That is, and I'll since they said I could, let me open up TKDA's stuff here today. Tom was asking what's the best way to use the same image for multiple tools in your tool palettes. Unfortunately, that is not possible. Tool palettes cannot store their own images. They have to make a copy. They have to give it that random alphanumeric string. So I would say save your priority images in a third-party location. I usually create a file in my tool palette structure that's just my working folder, and that's where I have like my 32-bit images and my 64-bit images, and my big and my small icons, my custom stuff. And I'll assign the same image from that location, and it's going to always create those random alphanumeric string copies, 2 copies for every tool or for every line item that you have in your tool palette. So if there is a way that doesn't work, Tom, I don't know about it. I spent a lot of time in tool palettes. I'd love to know if there's another way, but unfortunately I don't think so. So here I am inside that corporate tool palette environment. This company uses a toolbar as opposed to a ribbon, but the concept is the same. As soon as I come up and I find any one of these icons, let's say I want to go look at my civil symbols. As soon as I click on that button, we'll see that my command line came down here and it said, okay, what's that variable? This is my old location. This is my new location. And now I have all of this information available to me here. If I were to go look at my Windows file structure, again, this isn't strictly necessary. I just think it's a really, really, really good idea to say, all right, well, I have wherever my tool palette folder lives, all of these different subfolders are now my tool palette groups. And if I go into my civil symbols source folder, now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different DWGs. And in Civil 3D, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 palette tabs. Fun fact, you can also use your template, and I would recommend that in many times. So that 8th palette tab is just all of the blocks out of our survey template. But all the other 7, I have a symbols or a signs X series DWG, I have a signs X series tab, and these 15-ish blocks are exactly those same 15-ish blocks that are going to be in that drawing. If I were to go to my general tool palette group, even though I have all those different tabs, really my source folder, my commands, those are all my list routines. My notes have their own drawing, which has their own tab in there too. I've got a training tab just full of internet browser links. Takes us to the intranet, takes us to the ATG page, your global e-training. a couple of custom YouTube playlists for running through all that kind of stuff. Is that kind of giving some more feedback and some guidance?
Yeah,
on
that's
that?
really an interesting way of approaching it. I have ours set up so that people can create their own custom tool palettes. So I would assume I would just create a button that would take them to their custom tool palettes.
Yeah, although you would need to make sure that that is that those contents are not having a mirror switch on your robo
Yeah,
copies.
so they're not. Yeah, they're not synchronizing.
Yep, so that they're not getting overwritten.
Yep,
or so on and so forth. How do we update templates for a new version? Tom, are you saying that, here, Tom, if you want to talk, I've allowed you to talk and you can unmute yourself. Otherwise, you can continue to chat.
Sure, I can talk.
Hey, welcome, Tom. Thanks for your participation today.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, my question is, basically looking at the folder structure that you have, you're in the TDKA and then like 2018, all tool palettes, like that's pretty deep. And then when you say, okay, now I'm going to create 2019 folders, so right now all of those tool palettes are looking at the 2018 folder.
Yes, so
how
that
do
is a
you...
situation. So there's kind of two ways you can do anything that might have a file path. So right now, these are all macros to launch individual drawings. And you will notice that the macro just says it's the shell command to launch the drawing, and then it's just my file name. There is no file path. So you can either do your tool palettes as pathed tool palettes with a path, where every macro has a absolute file path in it. The alternative to that is to have what are called pathless tool palettes, which requires you to go into your profile and to add in all of those different source folders as profile search paths. So when it's when it's new version time, if you're using a pathless tool palette, all you have to do is add these locations again in your support file search path. If you're using a yes path, an absolute file path on everything inside your tool palettes, the easiest way to do that, always shut down Civil 3D before you do notepad editing. But the easiest way to do that is to go into your individual palette files and then find and replace the old absolute file path with your new absolute file path. One reason why I love Notepad++ as my notepad editor of choice is because when you're in your search dialog, you can run a find and replace, and you can run that find and replace in all documents that you have open. So you can open 200 palette ATC files, and you can find and replace C whatever 2019, and you can find and replace that for C whatever 2020 in three clicks, and however long it takes you to copy and paste your file paths. But great question. Does that answer your question, Tom?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Awesome. We also, and I want to come back to this, don't do your file path editing, or don't do your ATC file text editing in Civil 3 or while Civil 3D is open, because your Civil 3D writes this data for your tool palettes every time there's a profile save. Civil 3D saves your profile when you close the software. So if you do your text editing and then you close your software never had a time to read your new information, and it just overwrote it with the old stuff that it had open. So if you're going to be doing tool palette text editing, make sure Civil is closed while you're doing that process. And with that, folks, it is getting on to be about 1:15. We've gone plenty over. I really appreciate all these questions. I really appreciate all these feedback. Last word is going to go to Tom to make sure that you had everything you'd wanted to say about your XML files and for the tool palettes. Want to make sure we had that cleared up.
Yes, I'm good. The only thing I added as a comment to you guys is that I think you can go in and edit the weird name and repath it to like your custom image.
Okay.
But the only way I found to do it is within the land XML editing itself.
Sure. And I mean, this is a robust tool palette with 8 different tabs in it on that client side. This is 250 meg or 2.5 megabytes worth of data. I mean, most of these deployments are going to be somewhere around 150 to 300 megs per version per deployment. The fact that most computers come with a minimum of 500 or come with around 500 gigs of hard drive space, I think unless you're a Revit user who's doing everything in Navis and InfraWorks and Revit and has every software from the collection installed on your computer, most people have a half a gig to a gig to spare, and 2 or 3 megabytes per tool palette group. It does add up, but I think it's not the biggest deal in the end of the world. But that's just my opinion. And your firm and your drive space might be under different stuff. So if you've gotten your tool palette editing to work, congratulations, Tom. That might be something that's worth it. However, for the smaller bite size, I don't think most firms have to go there if they don't need to. So, Jeff, did you have any other parting comments?
No, I think it's been a good good webinar. Lots of good questions and feedback from the audience. So, it's a win.
Awesome. Well, if you've made it this far, you either really care about everything we have to say, or you got up from lunch and you did not log out earlier. If you liked this content, if you want to see more of this content, let us know. We really want to give the people what they want, and y'all have direct power over what we do and don't talk about. So thank you so much for your time, everybody. Stay safe out there. Have a great rest of your week.
Yep. Thanks, guys.